What would you do if a scared boy grabbed your jacket at a gas station and whispered that old people were being hurt inside a place meant to care for them? Would you walk away, or would you risk everything to find out if he was telling the truth? Before we continue, make sure to subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Roan Vex stood still beside his black motorcycle, the engine ticking as it cooled, and he looked down at the thin teen holding his sleeve like it was the only safe thing left in the world. And Roan had seen fear before in war zones, back alleys, and prison yards, but this fear was different because it wasn't fear for himself. It was fear for someone he loved. And the boy said his name was Eli Cross, and that he ran away 2 nights ago from a nursing home outside town where his grandma lived, and his voice shook as he said they were starving the old people, skipping their medicine, and stealing their money. And Roan's jaw tightened slowly because Roan was not a man who rushed into things, but he was a man who listened, especially when someone sounded honest. And Eli kept talking fast like he was scared someone would drag him away if he stopped, saying the head manager, a man named Dale Mercer, ran the place like a boss, not a caretaker, and that workers there laughed when old people cried for food, and that he saw them take cash from wallets and sign papers using shaking hands that didn't even know what they were signing. And Roan felt a slow burn rise in his chest because years ago his own mother died alone in a cheap care home while he was riding with his club across state lines. And guilt like that never leaves a man. It just sleeps until something wakes it up, and right now this boy's voice was waking it up hard. And Roan crouched down so his eyes were level with Eli's, and asked quietly if he was telling the truth. And Eli nodded so fast it looked like it hurt. And he pulled out a crumpled photo of a gray-haired woman smiling in a wheelchair with a paper bracelet on her wrist. And he said that was his grandma Lorna, and she didn't deserve to be there. Not like that. Not treated like trash. And Rome believed him because lies usually sound smooth, but truth sounds messy and scared like this. And a truck roared past on the highway, but Roan didn't even blink his mind already turning like gears in a machine, because Roan Vex was president of the Iron Serpents motorcycle club, a tight brotherhood of riders who lived by one rule above all others: protect the innocent even if it costs you. And he knew this was the kind of moment that defined whether a man was just loud or truly strong. And he stood up slowly and told Eli to stay close. And the boy obeyed without question, which told Roan how badly he needed someone to trust. And as they walked toward the bikes parked in a line under the dim station lights, Roan's crew watched with quiet curiosity. There was Holt Rayner, the strategist with sharp eyes who noticed everything. Brick Mondo, the enforcer built like a wall. Silas Boone, the medic who carried bandages in his saddlebag instead of bullets. And Tex Calder, the lookout who missed nothing that moved. And none of them spoke yet because they could read Roan's face, and they knew that look meant something serious had just entered their road. And Roan told them the short version, his voice low and calm, and no one laughed or doubted because the Iron Serpents didn't ignore trouble when it knocked softly. They leaned in and listened, and Holt asked one question, which was whether anyone else knew the boy had talked, and Eli whispered that one worker saw him snooping near the office earlier and made a phone call right after. And that was when Roan felt the air change, because that meant danger was already moving, and he scanned the dark. Rode out of habit and saw headlights turning into the station too slowly, too careful, and Tex muttered that the car had circled once already 5 minutes ago, and Brick cracked his knuckles once, not eager but ready, and Roan's mind made a fast decision, because leaders don't get time to think twice, they just think right. And he told Eli to stand behind Silas and not move no matter what. And the boy nodded, eyes wide, and the car rolled closer, engine low, windows tinted, and it stopped near the pumps, but no one got out, which was wrong because normal people got out, and Roan stepped forward alone, boots steady on the concrete. leather vest creaking softly. And he didn't reach for a weapon because he didn't need to yet. His presence was weapon enough most days, and he called out asking if they needed help. And for a second, nothing happened. Then the driver window lowered just an inch, and a man's voice inside asked if a kid had come by here. And the tone was too smooth, too fake. Polite, and Roan smiled slightly the way wolves might smile if they could. And he said lots of kids pass through. You'll have to be more clear. And the voice paused, then said never mind. And the window slid back up, and the car pulled away slow again. And Tex watched it leave until its lights vanished and said that wasn't family looking for a runaway. That was hunters looking for prey, and Roan agreed silently, because he had lived long enough to know the smell of trouble when it drifted in. And he looked back at Eli, who was shaking again, and said, "You did right telling me, son." And the word son slipped out before he could stop it. But he didn't take it back because it felt right. And inside his chest, that old guilt about his mother twisted into something new, something sharper, a promise forming. And Roan Vex was a man who kept promises even when they hurt. And as the night wind moved across the empty highway and the neon sign buzzed overhead, he realized this was no small problem. This was a rot hiding behind clean walls and polite smiles. And rot like that didn't stop unless someone tore it out, and Roan had torn out worse. Roan did not ride back to the clubhouse fast. He rode steady, which his crew knew meant he was thinking hard, and the highway lights slid across his face while Eli held tight behind Silas on the second bike, small hands gripping the medic's jacket like he was afraid the road itself might steal him. And when they reached the Iron Serpents clubhouse on the edge of town, the building looked quiet and dark from outside, but inside it was alive with low light. Maps on walls, tools on tables, and the smell of oil and coffee. A place built for men who lived ready. And Roan walked in first, and everyone else followed without a word because that was the rule. Leader first, questions later, and he sat at the long wooden table scarred with knife marks from old meetings and told Eli to sit beside him. Not across, because beside meant protection, and the boy looked shocked but obeyed, and Brick shut the door. Tex checked the windows. Holt spread out a county map, and Silas poured the kid a glass of water before even taking off his gloves, which showed exactly what kind of brotherhood this was. Tough men with careful hands when it mattered. And Roan asked Eli to explain everything again slowly, every detail, no rushing, and the boy spoke in broken pieces at first, but then stronger, saying the place was called Green Meadows Care Center, saying the Bossdale Mercer kept the medicine locked and only gave it when inspectors came, saying workers skipped meals for residents who complained, saying he saw a nurse take cash from his grandma's purse and laugh about it. And the room grew still because every man there had known someone old once, someone who deserved respect, not cruelty. And Holt tapped the map and said the place sat near a service road with only one main entrance, which meant cameras for sure, maybe guards too. And Brick asked one simple question, which was, are we talking scare tactics or war? And Roan leaned back thinking, because choices like that mattered. And he said, neither. We're talking truth first, because if the law can crush them clean, then that saves blood. And Tex nodded and said he knew someone who could help with that. A cop named Darius Kane, one of the rare good ones who still believed the badge meant something. And Roan said call him. And Tex did right there on speaker. And after 2 rings, a calm voice answered, and Tex explained quick and clear. And the cop did not laugh or brush it off. He just asked for proof. Real proof, and Eli's face fell, because he didn't have any, just what he saw, and Roan saw that look and said, we'll get proof. And the room shifted because that meant action, and Silas frowned and reminded him that places like that didn't run scams alone. There would be people backing them, maybe money men, maybe worse, and Holt agreed and said if money was being stolen, then someone higher up was protecting it. And Roan said that's why we move smart, not loud. And he looked at Eli, and asked if he could sneak back inside long, enough to show them where the office was. And the boy hesitated, fear flashing across his face. And for a second, Roan almost changed his mind because he hated risking kids. But then Eli nodded and said he would do it if it helped his grandma. And that answer settled it, because courage like that deserved backup, not doubt. And Roan stood and laid out the plan simple, so everyone understood. Holt and Tex would scout the building tonight from the trees to map cameras and exits. Silas would stay with Eli and prep a tiny body cam from old gear they once used on a smuggling job. Brick would wait with the bikes ready in case things went bad, and Roan would meet Officer Kane at dawn to set the legal trap. And no one argued because the plan was clean and fair and smart. And for a moment it almost felt easy, but then a loud engine roared past outside the clubhouse, slow, too slow, and all heads turned, and Tex moved to the curtain and peeked out. And his voice dropped when he said black sedan, same one from the gas station. And just like that, the air tightened, and Roan did not rush to the window. He stayed seated, which told his crew more than any shout could, because it meant this was serious enough to stay calm, and the car idled a few seconds, then rolled on. But nobody relaxed, and Eli whispered that those men work for Mercer sometimes. He had seen them talking near the office door, and Holt muttered that meant the rot was bigger than a crooked manager. It meant organized money, maybe even a network. And Brick smiled slightly the way he did before storms and said, "Good, bigger targets fall louder." And Roan finally stood and said, "Listen close. This isn't about pride. This is about that woman in the photo and every other old soul in that place who can't fight for themselves. We do this clean and we do it right." And the men nodded one by one, loyalty passing between them without noise. And Eli watched them like someone watching heroes from a storybook, except these heroes had scars and rough voices and tired eyes. And Roan rested a hand on the boy's shoulder and said, "Tonight you're not alone anymore." And Eli swallowed hard and nodded, and outside the night wind rattled the metal sign above the door like a warning bell. And somewhere down the road, the same black sedan stopped again in the dark where it could watch without being seen. And inside it, a man lifted a phone and said quietly that the biker had taken the kid. And a second voice answered, telling him not to lose sight of them. And back in the clubhouse, Roan looked at the map once more and felt that old war instinct rising. The feeling that a line had been crossed and there was no going back. And he knew with cold certainty that by tomorrow someone was going to make a move. And when enemies moved first, they usually aimed to end things fast. Morning came gray and heavy, like the sky itself knew something bad was about to happen. And Roan stood outside the clubhouse with a cup of black coffee going cold in his hand, while Holt and Tex returned from their night scout, their boots dusty and their faces tight. And before they even spoke, Roan could tell the news was not good. And Holt said the nursing home had more cameras than expected, and one guard who did not look like a guard but like hired muscle. And Tex added that a delivery van arrived at 3 a.m. and left 10 minutes later with no boxes, unloaded, which meant it was not a delivery at all. And Eli listened from the steps, hugging his arms, and whispered that Mercer sometimes met people late at night at his office. And Roan nodded slowly because the picture was getting clearer and uglier at the same time. And just then a pickup rolled into the dirt lot, and Officer Darius Kane stepped out wearing plain clothes and tired eyes, the kind of man who carried honesty like a weight instead of a badge. And he shook Roan's hand once and said, "If this is real, I can shut them down, but I need proof strong enough that no judge can ignore it." And Roan gestured to Eli and said, "The proof is inside that building. We just have to reach it." And Kane crouched in front of the boy and spoke, gently asking if he was brave enough to go back in with the camera. And Eli swallowed hard and looked at the photo of his grandma. He kept folded in his pocket. And after a long second, he nodded, and that was the moment every man there silently promised they would not let anything happen to him. And the plan moved fast after that. because speed kept fear from growing, and Silas clipped the tiny camera under Eli's loose collar. Holt drew a quick map in the dirt showing blind spots between cameras. Tex timed the patrol pattern of the guard for what he saw overnight. And Roan explained the exit plan twice, so the boy would remember even if he got scared. And Kane said he would wait down the road ready to move the second they had footage. And then it was time, and Roan knelt in front of Eli and said, "You don't have to be fearless. You just have to be steady." And Eli nodded again, though his hand shook, and Brick drove him close to the nursing home fence while the others spread out in hidden positions. Engines off, eyes sharp, and the building looked peaceful from outside with clean windows and trim grass. But Roan knew evil often wore polite faces, and Eli slipped through a gap in. The fence Tex had spotted and hurried toward the side door. He said staff sometimes forgot to lock, and for a long minute nothing happened, just wind in the trees and distant traffic, and Roan watched through binoculars barely blinking. And then Eli appeared inside a hallway on the tiny receiver screen Holt held, the camera sending live video, and they saw pale walls, dim lights, and an old woman in a wheelchair asleep beside a tray with no food on it. And Brick muttered under his breath while Kane's jaw tightened, and Eli moved carefully like they told him. Passing rooms where thin voices called weakly for help, and every sound made Roan's chest burn hotter. And then the boy reached the office door and pushed it open slowly, and inside they saw Mercer for the first time, a thick man in a clean shirt counting cash stacks on his desk, while another man stood beside him holding a folder. And Mercer laughed and said, "Cut the meal portions again next week. They won't notice, they barely know their own names." And Kane whispered that was enough to bury him already. But Roan held up a hand because he sensed something else coming, and suddenly the second man turned toward the camera like he felt eyes on him, and Roan's stomach dropped because he recognized that face. It was Lal Brandt, a mechanic who used to work with the Iron Serpents months ago, before he quit claiming he wanted a normal life. And Holt cursed, quietly realizing the same thing. And on screen, Lal stepped closer to Eli and said, "Well, look what crawled back." And the boy froze, and Mercer stood up slow and asked who the kid was. And Lal grabbed Eli's arm and said, "This is the brat who's been snooping. I told you I saw him near the office yesterday." And outside by the trees, Roan's calm finally cracked as anger flashed through him hot and sharp, because betrayal from strangers was expected, but betrayal from someone who once shared your table cut deeper than knives. And inside the office, Eli tried to pull free, but Lal held tight, and Mercer's smile turned thin and cruel, and he said children should not go where they don't belong. And he reached for the camera at Eli's collar, but before he could grab it, the office door burst open, and Brick stormed in like a freight train, because Roan had already given the signal the second he saw Lal's hand tighten, and everything exploded in emotion. Mercer shouted. Lal swung a punch. Brick blocked it and shoved him into a cabinet. Papers flew. Eli stumbled back, and Roan rushed in right behind Brick with eyes like steel. And Mercer tried to run, but Kane came through the side door with his badge raised and voice sharp, ordering him not to move. And for one frozen second, no one breathed. And then Lal lunged for Eli again like he wanted to silence him for good. And that was when Roan made a choice he could never take back, because he stepped between them instead of striking. Taking the hit meant for the boy straight to his ribs, and pain shot through him. But he did not fall. He just looked at Lal with deep disappointment and said, "You could have been family." And Lal hesitated, and that hesitation was enough for Brick to pin him down hard. And Kane cuffed Mercer while reading his rights. And alarms started ringing somewhere in the building as workers panicked. And Eli ran to Roan asking if he was okay, and Roan forced a small smile and said, "I've had worse from doors that didn't like me." But inside he knew this fight was not finished, because men like Mercer never worked alone, and As police sirens began to rise in the distance, Kane glanced at the papers on the desk and said, "This is bigger than one nursing home. This is a whole chain." And Roan looked at Mercer's pale face and realized the real enemy had not even shown itself yet, which meant the storm they thought was ending was only just beginning. Sirens screamed closer, but Roan barely heard them because his focus was locked on Mercer's desk, where Kane was flipping through the seized papers with growing concern, and the officer's calm face shifted into something harder as he read names and numbers that stretched far beyond one building. And he said quietly that this was a laundering ring using care homes across 3 counties, fake supply contracts, ghost employees, medicine resale. All of it tied to one organizer whose name sat at the top of the page like a shadow, Victor Halden. And even the air seemed to tighten when he said it, because that name carried weight in the underworld. The kind of man who never showed his face, but whose orders still ruined lives. And Roan felt a cold line run down his spine because he knew men like that did not forgive interference. They erased it, and outside tires crunched on gravel. Not police this time, but fast and reckless. And Tex's voice crackled through the radio, saying 3 SUVs just pulled up hard and men were getting out with weapons. And Kane swore under his breath because backup was still minutes away, and Roan's mind snapped in a command mode the way it always did when danger hit full force. And he told Kane to take Eli and the evidence out the back while they held the front. And Kane started to argue, but one look at Roan's eyes told him this was not a debate. It was a promise. And Eli grabbed Roan's sleeve, refusing to leave until Roan crouched and told him, "Your grandma needs you safe more than I need you here." And that truth hit the boy stronger than fear, so he nodded and ran with Kane down the hall. And Roan turned just as the front doors burst open and 3 men rushed in shouting, their boots heavy, their faces set with the confidence of people used to winning. And Brick stepped forward, first cracking his neck once while Holt slid to the side for angle, and Tex locked the rear entrance. And for a moment, nobody moved, tension stretching thin as wire. And then one attacker raised his gun, and everything broke loose. Brick slammed a chair into the man's arm, knocking the shot wide. Holt tackled another into the wall. Tex swung a fire extinguisher like a hammer, and Roan moved straight for the last one who charged him head-on. Their shoulders collided hard. Fists flew, breath burned, and the fight was loud and messy and real. No movie grace, just survival and will. And Roan felt his bruised ribs scream, but he ignored it because pain was nothing new to him. And the man swung again and again until Roan caught his wrist, twisted, and dropped him to the floor with a solid thud that shook dust from the ceiling tiles. And across the room, Brick had pinned his opponent while Holt kicked a weapon out of reach. And Tex yelled that more engines were coming, which meant time was gone. And Roan grabbed Mercer by the collar and dragged him forward, demanding where Halden was. And Mercer laughed, even with blood on his lip, and said, "Men like you never reach men like him." And that was when headlights flooded the windows and more footsteps pounded outside. But instead of gunfire, a voice shouted, "Police, drop your weapons." And relief hit sharp as lightning as real officers stormed in from both sides. Guns drawn, orders loud, and the remaining attackers froze because they knew the game had turned. And within seconds, cuffs clicked and a room filled with uniforms. And Kane re-entered holding Eli close, while another officer carried boxes of seized files, and the storm that had been building finally broke apart under flashing red and blue light. And Mercer's smirk faded as he realized his shield was gone. And he looked at Roan with quiet hate and said, "This isn't over." And Roan answered calm and steady, "It is for you." And he meant it. And outside, dawn was finally pushing through the clouds as ambulances checked the residents and officers escorted shaken staff away. And Eli spotted an elderly woman being wheeled out gently with a blanket around her shoulders, and he ran to her crying grandma. And the woman looked confused at first, then smiled faintly when she recognized him. And that small moment hit Roan harder than the fight had because it proved why all of this mattered. And Kane stepped beside him and said, Halden will run when he hears this. But he won't stay hidden forever now that we have his books. And Roan nodded because he understood that kind of war never ended in one day. It faded slowly like thunder moving off, and Brick clapped his shoulder, saying not bad for a morning's work. And Holt added that they just cracked a ring people had feared for years, and Tex said breakfast better be on Roan after this. And Roan almost smiled because their rough humor meant they were all still alive, and paramedics checked his ribs and told him nothing was broken, just bruised. And he waved them off because he had endured worse on lonelier nights. And across the lot, Eli helped his grandma into an ambulance seat, holding her hand careful like it was glass. And when he looked back at Roan, his eyes were different now, not empty and scared, but steady and grateful. And he ran over once more and hugged him tight without asking. And Roan froze a second, then rested a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. And Eli said, you kept your promise. And Roan answered softly, I always do. And for the first time in years, the old guilt about his mother eased a little inside his chest. Not gone, but quieter, like a wound finally, starting to close. And Kane walked over holding a card and told Roan if he ever wanted official work, there was a place for men like him. And Roan said he'd think about it, which was his way of saying maybe someday. And as the sun finally broke through the clouds, lighting the broken nursing home sign, police cars, and tired faces, Roan looked at his brother standing nearby, scratched and sore, but loyal as ever. And he knew this road would keep bringing trouble because that was the kind of world they lived in, but he also knew they would ride it together. And somewhere out there, Victor Halden was hearing the news and planning his next move, and Roan could almost feel that distant enemy's eyes turning toward him, not as a victim, but as a rival. And he welcomed that, because some battles choose you. And when they do, the only choice left is whether you stand or run. And Roan Vex had never been a man who ran.